The fire crackled low in the stone hearth, casting amber light across the weathered pine walls of the community hall. Outside, spring wind moved through the cottonwoods, but inside, 40 years of memory hung thick as smoke. Caleb Stone sat in the wooden chair he'd built in 1879, his hands gnarled as old rope, his eyes still sharp at 85. The children gathered close, drawn by something older than curiosity. This was the night Grandpa Caleb told the story. Thomas Webb, 12 years old and already tall for his age, held the daguerreotype photograph like it might crumble. Four people stood before a rough log cabin, faces solemn, in the way old photographs demanded. The ink had faded to sepia, but the figures remained clear. A bearded man in buckskin, two women in simple dresses, a young girl thin as winter wheat. Next to Caleb sat Emmeline Hayes Webb, silver hair pulled back in a bun, her eyes the same dark brown they'd been at 17. She watched her grandson study the photograph and allowed herself a small smile. Little Samuel, 5 years old, climbed onto Caleb's lap without asking permission. The old man caught him with practiced ease, settled him against his chest. Thomas looked up from the photograph. "Grandma Emma, this is you when you were young." Emma nodded once. "When I was 17 years old, before I knew what family meant." Little Samuel pointed at Caleb's image in the photograph. "Great-grandpa Caleb, you look strong." Caleb's weathered face creased into something between a smile and a wince. "I was dying when that photograph was taken, boy. Just didn't know it yet." The community members leaned forward. Some had heard this story a dozen times. Others were new to Stone Creek, drawn by reputation of a place where broken people found shelter. All understood that tonight's telling mattered. Thomas had turned 12. Old enough, Caleb always said, to understand what family costs. Thomas held the photograph toward his grandmother. "Tell us, Grandma Emma, how did you meet Grandpa Caleb?" Emma looked at Caleb. They'd told this story together for 40 years, correcting each other's details, arguing over who'd been more stubborn, who'd been more scared. Her voice when she spoke carried the weight of decades. "I was 17 years old and dying in the snow. Your Grandpa Caleb found me by accident. Or by God's hand, I've never decided which." Caleb shifted in his chair. "The boy wants the whole story, Emma. From the beginning." Thomas nodded eagerly. "From when you almost died." Caleb looked into the fire. His voice, when he began, held the rhythm of a man who'd spent 18 years walking alone through mountains learning the language of silence. December 1877, Utah Territory. "I was 40 years old and I believed I deserved to die alone." The room fell quiet. Even the children understood. This was not a story about heroes. This was a story about survival. The canyon walls rose 200 feet on either side, gray limestone carved by water that no longer flowed. Snow fell in a way that erased the world, steady and silent, the kind of weather that made men forget direction. Caleb Stone pushed through drifts that reached his knees, following blood sign that grew fainter with each step. The elk had been wounded 3 days ago, not by Caleb. Someone else had put an arrow through its shoulder, then failed to track it. Waste his dead wife would have called it. Wakana had taught him the Shoshone way. You take a life, you honor it. You follow until the end. So Caleb followed. His shoulder throbbed where he'd torn the stitches 2 weeks prior. His left boot had split at the heel and he'd wrapped it with strips cut from his shirt. The cold didn't bother him anymore. After 3 years alone, cold felt like companionship. He stopped beneath a rock overhang, checked the blood trail. Darker now. The elk was close to finished. He'd find it within the hour, butcher it. Where it fell, cache the meat for winter. Practical. Efficient. Alone. The temperature dropped. Caleb felt it in his lungs, that peculiar burn that came when air turned knife sharp. He looked up. The sky had gone the color of dirty wool. Storm coming, not the gentle kind. He should have turned back, should have found shelter, waited it out. But turning back meant returning to his empty camp, to another night, staring at the ring his wife used to wear, to the memory of his son's voice, calling for him while militia torches turned their lodge to ash. So he kept walking. The blizzard hit like a physical thing. One moment he could see 10 yards ahead. The next the world became white noise. Wind screamed through the canyon, driving snow horizontal. Temperature dropped 20 degrees in 20 minutes. Caleb knew these mountains. He'd walked them for 18 years. This storm would kill him if he didn't find shelter. He pushed forward, searching for the overhang he'd passed an hour ago. The wind disoriented him. North became south, up became down. His tracks vanished behind him as fast as he made them. Then the elk came. It charged from behind a boulder, massive and dying antlers lowered in blind panic. A wounded animal didn't think. It only reacted. The bull caught Caleb in the shoulder, the same shoulder he'd injured before. Bone struck bone. Something tore. Caleb went down hard, face first into snow. Pain exploded white-hot through his left side. He tried to rise. His arm wouldn't work. Blood spread dark across the snow, mixing with the elk's trail. The bull staggered away, crashing through brush, leaving Caleb alone in the storm. "Get up," he told himself. "Get up or die here." He managed his knees. The world tilted. He crawled toward what he thought was shelter, dragging his rifle, his good hand clutching at frozen earth. The cold stopped hurting. That scared him more than the pain had. He thought of Wakana, her face the morning they'd married in the Shoshone way, hands bound with leather promises spoken in 2 languages. He thought of Samuel, 8 years old, running toward him with a rabbit he'd snared, pride bright in his eyes. "I'm sorry I wasn't there," Caleb thought. "I'm sorry I left you alone." His hand slipped. He fell forward. Snow covered his face, filled his mouth. He didn't try to rise again. The cold had gone soft now, almost warm. His thoughts began to drift. "This is what I deserve," he thought. "To die the same way they did, cold and alone." He closed his eyes. The storm howled around him. And Caleb Stone, 40 years old mountain man and widower, prepared to meet whatever waited beyond the white. He didn't see the 2 figures approaching through the snow. Didn't hear them arguing in low voices about whether to help a dying stranger. Didn't feel strong hands roll him over, check his pulse, make a decision that would change 4 lives forever. He only felt darkness and then nothing at all. Sister Margaret Wright crouched beside the body, 2 fingers pressed against the man's throat. Her right hand, scarred and twisted from old burns, could barely hold pressure steady. She used her left hand instead, the good one, feeling for the pulse she knew must be there. "He's alive," she said. "Barely." Sister Ruth Porter stood 3 feet back, hand on the knife at her belt. Snow clung to her wool coat, ice crystals forming in her blonde hair. Her left leg, damaged 3 years ago and never properly healed, ached in the cold. She studied the man with a nurse's trained eye. "Armed," Ruth said. "Could be a scout. Could be Army." Margaret's fingers found the pulse. Weak, irregular, but present. She pulled Snow away from his face, saw the frozen blood at his shoulder, the torn clothing, the blue tinge to his lips. "He's hypothermic. Core temperature's too low. If we leave him, he dies in an hour." Ruth shifted her weight, grimacing as her bad leg protested. "We don't know him. We don't leave people today, Ruth." Ruth was quiet for a long moment. They both knew what came next. Their small shelter, hidden in the canyon for 3 years, had kept them invisible. Bringing a stranger there meant risk. It meant questions. It meant the possibility that the world they'd fled might find them again. But Sister Margaret had made a vow once, a long time ago. Not to a church that had abandoned them, but to God. And God, she believed, didn't make exceptions for convenience. "Help me move him," Margaret said. Ruth hesitated, then nodded. She pulled rope from her pack, began fashioning a travois from pine branches. Her movements were efficient, practiced. 3 years of survival had taught them both. They dragged him 400 yards through the storm. Margaret pulled from the front, using her good left hand and her strong back. Ruth pushed from behind, compensating for her damaged leg with upper body strength. They stopped twice. Once when Ruth's leg gave out, entirely spasming in the cold. Once when they had to navigate around a fallen boulder. The shelter entrance looked like nothing. A gap beneath a limestone ledge hidden by rockslide debris from the earthquake 10 years prior. They'd reinforced it over 3 winters, made it tight against wind, made it invisible to passing eyes. Margaret pulled the stone slab aside. Inside, dim firelight reflected off tanned hides. The smell of wood smoke and dried herbs filled the space. Home, such as it was. They dragged the man inside, laid him on the central hide near the fire pit. Margaret worked quickly, cutting away his frozen coat with her knife. The blade was sharp. She'd learned to keep it that way. Ruth closed the entrance behind them, sealing out the storm. Then she moved to the fire, built it up with dry wood from their carefully rationed stack. Heat filled the space. "His shoulders torn open," Margaret said. "Looks like an antler gore. Fresh, maybe an hour old." Ruth knelt beside her, examined the wound with professional detachment. "Bones intact. Tissue damage is significant but manageable. The hypothermia is the real problem." Margaret stripped the man's shirt, exposed pale skin mottled with cold. His chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular breaths. His fingers had gone white. Frostbite on 3 digits, maybe 4. Ruth stood, moved to their supplies, returned with strips of cloth, dried yarrow needle, and sinew thread. She worked without speaking, cleaning the wound, packing it with crushed herbs, stitching the torn flesh with practiced efficiency. 10 stitches, small and neat. Margaret held the man down when he moaned but didn't wake. When Ruth finished, she sat back on her heels and looked at Margaret. Core temperature is around 90 degrees, Ruth said. Maybe lower. We need to warm him directly or we lose him within the hour. Margaret understood what Ruth was asking. Their eyes met. Neither spoke the obvious truth. They'd taken vows of chastity 15 years ago, promised lives of service and separation from worldly concerns. Those vows had been made to an institution that no longer protected them, to a church that had looked away when soldiers burned their convent. But old promises had weight, even broken ones. God wouldn't want us to watch a man die when we can prevent it, Margaret said quietly. Ruth's jaw tightened. What if he wakes? Then we deal with it. Ruth removed her outer skirt, keeping her undergarments. Practical modesty. Margaret did the same. They spread the heavy bare hide over the sleeping area, layered it with wool blankets salvaged from their old life. Margaret crawled beneath, first positioned herself on the man's left side. Ruth joined from the right, stiff with discomfort. The man lay between them, shivering violently despite his unconscious state. The fire crackled. Wind howled against the stone slab entrance. Inside, 3 bodies shared warmth born of necessity, not choice or mirage. Ruth broke the silence after a long while. He doesn't smell like a soldier. How would you know? Margaret asked. Soldiers smell like whiskey and violence. He smells like pine smoke and animal hide. Margaret was quiet, then said, mountain man maybe. Trapper. They lay in silence. The man's shivering began to ease. His breathing deepened, became more regular. Color slowly returned to his lips. What if he dies anyway? Ruth whispered. Then at least we tried. Outside, the blizzard buried the canyon under 3 feet of new snow. Inside, a stranger clung to life between 2 women who'd learned to survive by trusting no one. Hours passed. The man stirred, once mumbled words neither woman understood. Margaret thought she heard him say a name. Samuel. He repeated it twice, voice breaking, then fell silent again. Ruth turned her head toward Margaret in the darkness. He's dreaming, or remembering, Margaret said softly. She wondered what memories haunted a man who chose to die alone in a winter storm. Wondered what losses drove a person into mountains where help couldn't reach. She knew something about that kind of grief. She'd carried her own for 3 years, buried so deep it had become part of her bones. The fire burned low. Margaret rose carefully, added wood, returned to her place. The man's body had stopped shaking. His skin no longer felt like ice. He would live through the night. Tomorrow would bring different questions. Ruth's voice came quiet through the darkness. What did we just do, Margaret? We saved a life. We brought danger into our shelter. Maybe Margaret admitted, or maybe we brought help. Ruth said nothing. They both knew hope was dangerous. Hope made you careless. Hope made you believe things could be different than they were. But sometimes hope was all you had left. Dawnlight filtered through cracks in the rock wall, pale and thin. Caleb woke to warmth and confusion. His shoulder screamed. His head felt packed with wool. But he was alive, and that seemed both surprising and unwelcome. He opened his eyes slowly. Stone ceiling, smoke-stained hides stretched across walls. A fire pit carefully constructed vented through a natural chimney crack. Supplies organized with military precision. 2 sleeping areas separated from each other and from where he lay. Someone had undressed him to his undergarments. Someone had bandaged his shoulder with skill. Someone had saved his life. He tried to sit up. Pain lanced through his left side. He managed to prop himself on his good elbow, looked around the shelter with a mountain man's eye for detail. Defensible. Single entrance, good sight lines. No wasted space. Tools and weapons placed for quick access but not immediate visibility. Religious items present, a wooden cross hand-carved, a rosary hanging from a peg, a water-damaged prayer book. Women lived here. More than one. Educated women based on the book. Women who knew survival. The stone slab scraped. Caleb's hand instinctively moved toward where his weapon should have been. Found nothing. Sister Ruth entered carrying a water bladder. She froze when she saw him awake. Her hand dropped to the knife at her belt. For a long moment, they studied each other. She was younger than he'd first thought. Early 30s, maybe. Blonde hair tied back roughly. Eyes the color of winter sky, sharp and assessing. She moved with a slight limp, favoring her left leg. "You're not dead," she said finally. "That's something." Her accent surprised him. Eastern, Philadelphia maybe, educated speech patterns, not frontier rough. Caleb tried to speak. His throat felt like sandpaper. Ruth approached cautiously, staying out of reach, and set the water bladder near him. "Drink slowly. You haven't had water in 3 days." Caleb managed to sit fully upright. Every muscle protested. He reached for the water bladder with his good hand, drank carefully. Cold, clean water. Creek water, probably. He could taste pine and stone. He watched Ruth over the rim of the bladder. She watched him back. "Name?" she asked. "Caleb Stone." "What were you doing in the canyon tracking wounded elk?" "Storm caught me." "You a soldier?" "No, ma'am." "Scout, prospector, bounty hunter." "Mountain man, trap mostly." "Sometimes hunt." Ruth's shoulders relaxed slightly. She stepped back, leaned against the wall. "You work for Fort Douglas." "Numb, don't work for anyone." The stone slab scraped again. Sister Margaret entered with an armload of firewood. She was taller than Ruth, broader in the shoulders. Dark hair cut short. Strong hands, though the right one showed severe scarring. 2 fingers curled and useless. She saw Caleb awake and stopped. Set the wood down slowly, deliberately. Moved to a position 6 feet away and sat cross-legged. Said nothing. Just watched. Caleb found her silence more unnerving than Ruth's questions. This was a woman who'd seen violence and survived it. A woman who wouldn't flinch from hard choices. Ruth spoke again. "You kill Indians." The question hung in the air. Caleb knew his answer mattered. "I married one," he said. Both women reacted. Margaret's expression shifted. Ruth leaned forward slightly. Caleb continued, voice flat. "Shoshone woman named Wakana. Had a son, Samuel. Both dead 3 years now." "How?" Ruth asked. "Militia raid on their winter camp. I was away checking trap lines. Came back to ash and bodies." Margaret's scarred hand clenched involuntarily. When she spoke, her voice was softer than before. "I'm sorry for your loss." Caleb looked at her. Really looked. Saw recognition in her eyes. The kind that came from shared understanding of grief that had no edges, no end. "Something happened to you too," he said. It wasn't a question. Margaret heard it as statement of fact. She glanced at Ruth. Ruth gave a small nod. "We were at St. Catherine's Convent," Ruth said, "near Fort Douglas, 3 years ago, winter of 1874. Caleb knew the place. Small mission ran a school for Indian children. It had burned. Everyone knew about the fire. The silence stretched. Margaret looked at her scarred hand. "Soldiers thought we were sheltering Apache scouts," she said finally. "We were. But they were children. Orphans. We ran a school." Ruth's voice went hard. "Army didn't care about details. Came at night with torches and rifles." Margaret held up her damaged hand. "I tried to get the children out. Got one, lost 2. I can still hear them screaming." Caleb understood. The kind of screaming that never stopped even when the voices went silent. The kind that echoed in dreams and waking hours both. "You did what you could," he said quietly. Margaret's eyes flashed. It wasn't enough. No one spoke for a moment. The fire popped. Outside, wind moved through the canyon. Ruth broke the silence. "After the fire, the church offered us transfer to Santa Fe. We declined." Why, Caleb asked, though he thought he knew. "Because the church told us to forgive and forget," Margaret said. "To pray for the soldiers' souls. Some things you don't forgive." Caleb nodded once. He understood that too. Ruth stood, moved to a wooden crate that served as storage. "This shelter kept us alive 3 winters. We won't risk it." She began listing rules. Her voice took on the cadence of someone used to giving orders, someone trained in discipline. "No fire after dark unless we say so. Smoke draws attention. No leaving shelter without telling one of us. Canyon's dangerous. No touching weapons unless we hand them to you. You want food, you work for it." She paused, looked him straight in the eye. "You try anything, anything at all, and Sister Margaret will put an arrow through your chest before you move 3 feet." Caleb glanced at Margaret. She had a bow and quiver leaning beside her that he hadn't noticed before. Her expression didn't change. "I didn't ask to stay," Caleb said. "You're still breathing," Ruth replied. "That means you owe us your life. We'll decide when the debt's paid." Margaret's voice cut in softer but firm. "You can leave when you are healed. But while you're here, you follow our rules. This shelter kept us alive. We won't risk it for a stranger." "Fair enough," Caleb said. Margaret stood, picked up a folded hide, placed it in the corner farthest from the entrance. "You sleep there." Caleb noticed they'd positioned him away from the exit and the weapons cache. "Smart. Trust earned, not given." "Thank you," he said. Margaret looked surprised by the courtesy. "We'll see if you still thank us after a week." Over the next 5 days, Caleb learned the rhythm of their lives. Ruth checked his shoulder twice daily, changing the bandage, inspecting for infection. Her touch was professional, efficient, carrying the confidence of medical training. She never explained where she learned nursing. He never asked. Margaret moved through the shelter with quiet purpose, always working, tanning hides, repairing tools, preparing food with careful rationing. Her scarred hand limited her, but she'd learned to compensate. She used it as brace while her left hand did precision work. They spoke little. When they did, conversation stayed practical. Weather, food supplies, trapline conditions. Nothing personal, nothing that invited questions about their past or his. On the second day, when Caleb could stand without his legs shaking, Ruth handed him torn hide strips. "Patch these. If you can't sew, hand them back." Caleb took them, found a bone needle and the repair kit, set to work. His stitches were rough, at first, hands stiff from frostbite healing. But muscle memory returned. He'd spent 18 years maintaining gear. This was familiar work. Ruth checked his progress after an hour. "Not pretty, but it holds. You've done this before. Army taught me. Frontier reminded me." She almost smiled. Almost. On the third day, Caleb walked the trapline with Ruth. She moved slowly, her damaged leg forcing a rolling gait. He matched her pace without comment. Rushing ahead would be disrespectful. She'd notice. She noticed everything. At the fourth trap, she stopped. "This one never catches anything." Caleb studied the placement. Rabbits run uphill when scared. Put it 3 feet higher, closer to that brush pile. "How do you know?" "Watch them 18 years. That evening, the relocated trap caught 2 rabbits. Ruth brought them back, handed them to Caleb without a word. But her expression said enough. "Maybe you're not useless." On the fourth day, Caleb split firewood. One-handed work, his injured shoulder still too weak for full motion. Margaret watched from the doorway as he established a rhythm economy of motion, no wasted energy. He stacked wood by size. Small kindling for starting fires. Medium for cooking. Large logs for overnight burning. Organization born from years of solo survival. "You're methodical," Margaret observed. "Survival's about systems, not strength." She nodded, first sign of respect. On the 5th day, Caleb repaired Ruth's knife handle. The original grip had cracked, making it uncomfortable to hold. He carved a new one from a piece of antler, shaped it to fit her hand based on how he'd watched her grip it during their trapline walk. Ruth examined it carefully, tested the balance. It fit perfectly. "Thank you," she said. First time she'd called him by name. "Caleb, there's stew. You should eat." That night, sitting around the fire pit, something shifted. They weren't friends. Trust took longer than 5 days, but they'd become something else. People who worked together, people who pulled weight, people who understood that survival required contribution from everyone. Margaret cleaned her bow, checking the string tension. Caleb mended his torn shirt. Ruth ground dried herbs in a stone bowl, preparing medical supplies. No one spoke. The silence felt comfortable now instead of wary. Then the wind changed direction, bringing new sounds. Caleb's head came up. His body went still in the way of predators, sensing prey. Margaret noticed. "What is it?" "Someone's in the canyon," Caleb said quietly, moving slow, not far from here. Ruth stood, hand on her knife. "How do you know?" Caleb tilted his head, listening. "Boots on stone. Different rhythm than animal. One person, traveling alone." Margaret and Ruth exchanged glances. In 3 years, only 2 people had come this close to their shelter. Both times they'd hidden until the threat passed. "Could be a trapper," Ruth said. "Could be someone looking for us." Caleb shook his head slightly. "Wrong season for most trappers. And whoever it is, they're struggling." "Listen." They all fell silent. After a moment, Margaret heard it too. Irregular footsteps. Something dragging. The sound of someone barely holding on. We wait, Margaret decided. If they pass, we stay hidden. If they collapse close by, she didn't finish. They all knew. The same choice they'd faced with Caleb. Leave someone to die or risk everything to help. The sounds grew closer, then stopped. Silence stretched for 3 full minutes. Then a soft thud, like a body falling. Caleb stood carefully. I'll check. Ruth moved to block him. You're not healed. Better me than you. If it's a trap, I'm expendable. Margaret spoke quietly. No one here is expendable. We go together. They armed themselves. Margaret with her bow, Ruth with her knife and a club made from oak root, Caleb with the rifle they'd finally returned to him that morning. The stone slab scraped open. Cold air flooded in. The morning sun hung low over the eastern ridge, painting snow blue-white. They found her 70 yards from their shelter, half hidden in the brush. She'd collapsed face down, one arm stretched forward like she'd been reaching for something, barefoot, tattered skirt crusted with frozen mud, hair tangled with ice and dead leaves. Margaret reached her first crouch down check for pulse. Alive. Just barely. They rolled her over carefully. The girl's face was gaunt cheekbones, sharp under skin the color of old wax, 17, maybe 18 years old. Her lips had gone blue-white. Her breathing came shallow and irregular. Then Caleb saw her shoulder. The dress had torn there, revealing pale skin marked with an angry red brand. Fresh, maybe 3 weeks old. Infected yellow pus at the edges. The letter M, deliberate, professional, permanent. Ruth saw it too. Her face went hard. Someone marked her. Margaret's voice came quiet. Trafficking mark. We've seen it before. On her arms, fading bruises. On her wrists, scars that suggested shackles. On her feet, blackened toes from severe frostbite. Ruth knelt beside Margaret, began immediate assessment. Core temperature critical. Severe hypothermia, malnutrition infection. She's been out here days. Can we move her? Caleb asked. We have to. She won't survive another hour in this cold. They carried her between them, Margaret and Caleb supporting her upper body, Ruth taking her legs. She weighed almost nothing. 90 pounds, maybe less. Inside, Ruth took command. Her nurse training overrode everything else. Strip her clothes, they're wet. Build up the fire. Caleb boil water, Margaret all the blankets. They worked with practiced efficiency born from saving Caleb a week earlier. Gradually rewarming. Heated stones wrapped in cloth placed around her core. Clean her brand infection with boiled water and crushed yarrow. Honey on the worst frostbite. Warm broth trickled slowly into her mouth. Margaret saw the brand again, this time in full firelight. Her scarred hand unconsciously moved to touch her own old burns. Someone did this deliberately. Caleb's voice came grim from across the shelter. Slavers mark runaways. How do you know? Ruth asked without looking up from her work. Seen it before, twice. Both times in mining camps. The girl stirred. Her eyelids fluttered. For a moment, her eyes opened unfocused and filled with terror. Ruth held her down gently. Child, stop. You're safe. The girl saw the cross on the wall. Confusion crossed her face, then something like hope. Then fear again. She tried to speak. No words came, just a broken sound. Margaret leaned close. You're safe here. What's your name? The girl's eyes moved between them. 3 strangers. A shelter she didn't know. She'd trusted before. That trust had earned her a brand and abandonment. Long silence stretched. Margaret waited. Patient, non-threatening. Finally, barely a whisper. Emmeline Hayes. Marston called me Emma. Ruth's voice went gentle. Who branded you, Emmeline? The girl's entire body went rigid at the name. Dalton Marston. Caleb heard the name and felt something cold move through him. He kept his expression neutral, but Margaret saw the reaction. You know that name? Margaret said. Caleb nodded slowly. I know of him. Land baron, runs mining operations east of here. What else? Ruth demanded. Uses indentured workers, calls it opportunity for orphans. Everyone knows it's slavery. Margaret's jaw tightened. Why haven't authorities stopped him? He donates to churches, pays taxes, employs voters. Territory government looks the other way. Emma's voice came again, stronger now. Stronger with anger. He bought me from Denver orphanage when I was 14. Said he'd give me education, trade skills, put me in mining camp kitchen, 18-hour days. The words came faster now, like blood from a wound opened. Tried to escape last summer. They caught me. He branded me himself, said I was a lesson to others. Ruth's hand covered Emma's. What happened then? Emma's voice broke. I refused to cooperate, refused to work, refused to eat. He said I was more trouble than I was worth. Had his men take me into the mountains. Left me in the snow a week ago. Told me if God wanted me to live, he'd provide a miracle. She looked at Margaret, at Ruth, at Caleb. Her eyes filled. I didn't think anyone would find me. I didn't think anyone would care. No one spoke for a long moment. The fire crackled. Wind moved snow against the stone entrance. Finally, Margaret spoke. Her voice carried absolute certainty. He won't get you back. Emma searched her face, looking for lies, looking for false promises. Found only iron determination. You don't understand, Emma whispered. He always finds runaways. He has trackers, money, friends in government. Then he'll have to go through us, Ruth said. Emma looked at Caleb. Why would you help me? You don't know me. Caleb thought about his wife burned to death because she'd sheltered Apache children. Thought about his son, 8 years old, killed for being born to the wrong mother. Thought about 3 years of running from a grief that never ended. Because I'm tired of watching innocent people die, he said. That evening, after Emma had fallen into exhausted sleep, Margaret and Ruth stepped outside. The sun had set. Stars filled the sky, sharp and cold. Ruth spoke first. If we keep her, we become targets. We were targets already, Margaret replied. The church, the army, everyone who burned our convent. We're living ghosts. This is different. Marston has money, power, legal claim. Legal claim to a human being. That's evil, Ruth. I know. Ruth's voice carried frustration and fear. But we can barely survive as 3. 4 is what we do? Margaret interrupted. We save who we can. That's all we've ever done. Ruth was quiet for a long time. She reminds you of them. The children. Margaret's voice broke slightly. Yes, and this time I won't fail. Ruth touched her friend's shoulder. We won't fail. Inside, Caleb sat near the fire watching Emma sleep. She'd curled into herself, arms wrapped around her chest, even in sleep, protecting the brand that marked her as property. He thought about the choice Margaret and Ruth were making. Thought about the cost of standing against a man like Marston. Thought about his own failures, his own cowardice 3 years ago when he'd returned to ash instead of fighting. Tomorrow would bring new dangers. Marston would come looking. Men like that always did. But tonight, 4 people who'd each survived their own hells slept under the same roof. Not a family, not yet, maybe never. But something had formed in that shelter over the past week. Something built on shared trauma and hard choices, and the simple act of not turning away when someone needed help. Caleb added wood to the fire, banked it for the long night ahead. Emma stirred in her sleep, made a small sound. Margaret, in her sleeping area, sat up slightly, checking on the girl with the instinct of someone who'd once been responsible for children. Ruth rolled over, opened one eye. We'll need more supplies if she's staying. She's staying, Margaret said quietly. Then we plan accordingly, Caleb added. Outside, winter settled deeper into the canyon. But inside the hidden shelter, warmth held against the darkness. 4 broken people, each carrying scars the world couldn't see, had found something unexpected in the Utah mountains. They'd found each other. And in finding each other, they'd found a reason to survive another day. The fire burned low as Emma slept between them, this girl child who'd been branded like livestock and left to die. Margaret watched over her with fierce protectiveness. Ruth checked her vital signs through the night. Caleb positioned himself by the entrance rifle within reach, ready for whatever morning might bring. None of them spoke the truth they all understood. This girl's survival meant their discovery. Keeping her meant war with a man who owned judges and paid soldiers. But they'd made their choice. Sometimes the right thing costs everything. They'd learned that lesson 3 years ago when flames consumed innocence and authority looked away. They wouldn't look away now. Emma Sturge spoke in her sleep. Silas, my brother Silas. Margaret leaned close, whispered comfort. You're safe now, sleep. But Emma's words had already planted themselves. Another name, another person lost to Marston's empire, another reason to fight. The night passed slowly. The four who winter found held their ground together waiting for dawn and whatever it might bring. The fire in the Stone Creek Community Hall had burned lower. Caleb's voice had carried them through the first winter, through his near death and rescue, through finding Emma frozen in the snow. Now his weathered hands gripped the chair arms, and something harder entered his eyes. Thomas leaned forward, the daguerreotype still clutched in his hands. What happened next, Grandpa Caleb? Did Marston find you? Emma's voice cut in quiet but firm. He found all of us, Thomas. That's when winter became something else entirely. Little Samuel had fallen asleep against Caleb's chest. The old man adjusted the boy's weight, looked across at Emma. You want to tell this part? Emma shook her head. This part's yours. You made the choices. Caleb's jaw tightened. We all made choices, some harder than others. He stared into the fire for a long moment, then continued. February came to the canyon like an invader, the kind of cold that made breath freeze in your lungs, the kind that killed silently if you stopped moving. We'd been four people sharing one shelter for 2 weeks. Emma was healing, slowly but healing. We thought maybe we had time. His voice dropped. We were wrong. Week 2 brought sounds that didn't belong. Caleb heard them first waking in darkness 3 hours before dawn. His mountain man's instincts, honed by 18 years of survival, recognized wrongness before his conscious mind understood it. Horses, 3 of them, moving deliberately through terrain that should have been empty. He rose without sound, moved to where Margaret slept, touched her shoulder once. She woke instantly, hand reaching for the knife she kept within arm's reach. Someone's in the canyon, Caleb whispered, coming from the east. Margaret sat up, fully alert. How many 3 riders? Traveling with purpose. Ruth woke at the sound of their voices. Emma stirred but didn't wake. The brand infection had improved, but fever still troubled her sleep. How far? Margaret asked. Mile, maybe less. They'll reach the southern ridge by sunrise. Ruth moved to Emma's side, checked her forehead. Still warm. If we need to move her, it'll be difficult. Caleb had already gone to the entrance, sliding the stone slab open just enough to peer through the gap. Dawnlight was beginning to paint the eastern sky. He could see his breath-white clouds that dissipated instantly in the frigid air. He studied the canyon with practiced eyes, looking for movement, for wrongness. There, 300 yards south. Dark shapes moving between the trees. Horses, definitely. And riders who knew the land well enough to travel it in near darkness. They're searching, he said quietly. Methodical, professional. Margaret joined him at the entrance, bow in hand. For us, for Emma. But they don't know about us yet. That'll change if they find our tracks. Caleb had already thought of that. The snow from the previous week had covered most signs of their passage. But the shelter entrance had been opened and closed multiple times. A careful tracker would spot the disturbance. We need to prepare, he said. If they find us, we don't fight unless forced. 3 armed men against us is bad odds. What do we do? Ruth asked. We make it look like only 2 people live here. Hide Emma completely. If they search, I claim I found shelter here with Sister Margaret. 2 people surviving winter. Nothing suspicious. And me? Ruth asked. You weren't here when they arrived. Checking trap lines. That explains 3 sets of tracks if they've seen them. Margaret considered this, nodded slowly. It could work. If Emma stays hidden and quiet. They moved quickly. Ruth gathered Emma's few possessions, hid them beneath the sleeping hides in Margaret's area. Emma woke as they moved her. What's happening? Her voice carried fear. Ruth's hand covered her mouth gently. Quiet. Men are searching the canyon. We think they're looking for you. Emma's eyes went wide, and she nodded understanding. Ruth positioned her in the back corner behind the stacked supplies covered with hides. From the entrance, she'd be invisible. Don't make a sound, Ruth whispered. No matter what you hear. Emma nodded again. Her hand found Ruth's squeezed once. Thank you. Then Ruth was gone, slipping out the entrance with her medical kit and a reason to be checking distant trap lines. She'd circle wide, come back only when the threat passed or when Margaret signaled. Caleb and Margaret waited. They built up the fire, made morning preparations that would look natural. 2 people sharing shelter through winter. Nothing more. The sun cleared the eastern ridge. Golden light flooded the canyon, turning snow into fields of diamond. Then they heard boots on stone. Deliberate footsteps, coming closer. Margaret moved to sit by the fire, her bow within reach, but not immediately visible. Caleb positioned himself near the entrance rifle, leaning against the wall. Close enough to grab, far enough to seem non-threatening. The footsteps stopped outside. A long silence. Then a voice cultured and confident. "Hello, the shelter. We mean no harm." Caleb recognized the tone. Authority. Education. A man used to being obeyed. He glanced at Margaret. She nodded once. Caleb opened the stone slab, fully stepped into the entrance. Showed himself, but didn't emerge completely. A position of strength, not fear. 3 men stood 30 yards away. The one in front wore a wool coat worth more than most miners earned in a year. Good boots, leather gloves, silver ring catching morning light. A scar ran beneath his chin, old and pale. Dalton Marston. Even if Caleb hadn't known the name, he would have recognized the type. Men who believed the world existed to serve their purposes. Behind Marston stood 2 hired men. Muscle, not brains. Good enough with rifles, probably. Not skilled enough to worry Caleb in a real fight. "You're on someone's trap line, friend," Caleb said. His voice carried mountain casual. No fear, no aggression. "Best move along." Marston laughed. Friendly, not mocking. "I respect that. Territorial man. I appreciate it." He took 2 steps closer. Caleb's hand drifted toward his rifle. Marston noticed, stopped, held up both hands in a peaceful gesture. "Name's Dalton Marston. I run the mining operations east of here. Maybe you've heard of me." Caleb said nothing. "Let the silence work. I'm tracking a runaway worker." Marston continued. "Young girl, 17, dark hair. She stole from me. I just want what's mine returned." Still Caleb remained silent. Mountain men learned early that silence made other people uncomfortable, made them talk more, reveal more. Marston's smile tightened slightly. "I know someone's in there. I can see smoke from your fire. And I counted 4 different boot prints in the snow half a mile back." Truth mixed with pressure. Marston was good at this. "Just me," Caleb said. "Probably saw where I doubled back checking snares." From inside the shelter, Margaret's voice rang out. Clear, educated, carrying authority that surprised everyone. "You'll look at nothing. This is our shelter. You're trespassing." She stepped into the entrance beside Caleb. Bow in hand, arrow nocked. Steady despite her scarred right hand, close enough that Caleb could feel her presence, far enough that they didn't crowd each other. Marston's expression changed. Recognition flashed across his face, then something like surprise. "Sister Margaret." His tone shifted, became almost gentle. "From Fort Douglas Mission," Margaret said nothing. Her arrow didn't waver. "I remember you from the Catholic social events," Marston continued. "You ran that school for Indian children. Fine work you did there. Tragic what happened." "You burned it," Margaret said flatly. Marston's face showed genuine discomfort. "I didn't burn your convent, sister. I was against that action. You donated money to Fort Douglas Commissary that month. Fed the soldiers who did it. I support our military." Marston's voice took on a defensive edge. "That doesn't mean I approve of every action they take. I wrote a letter to the territorial governor condemning the fire. It's in the public records." "Easy to condemn after the fact," Margaret replied, "when the children are already dead." Marston was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its smooth confidence. "I lost people too, sister. My wife, my daughter, both dead in childbirth. I understand grief. Then you understand we have nothing more to say to each other." Marston switched tactics, addressed Caleb directly. "Look, I'm a reasonable man. I run a legitimate business. I give orphans work, food, shelter they wouldn't have otherwise. This girl, the one I'm tracking, she was offered all that. She chose theft and violence instead." "What kind of violence?" Caleb asked. "She attacked my foreman with a kitchen knife, scarred his face. I had to mark her as warning to others. It's business. I can't have workers thinking they can assault management without consequence." "You branded her indentured servant," Law Marston said. "Legal under territorial statute. I have the contracts filed in Salt Lake City courthouse." Margaret's arrow shifted slightly, aiming now at Marston's chest. "We don't negotiate with slavers." Marston's jaw tightened. "Slavery's illegal, sister. I employ workers. The law is on my side. I suggest you think about that carefully." He turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing. There's a reward posted. $100 for the girl, dead or alive. I'd prefer alive, she's worth more working. But dead solves my problem too. He looked at Caleb meaningfully. So if you're thinking of running with her, others will be looking as well. Not all of them as civilized as me. Marston and his men mounted their horses, but Marston paused, looked back at Caleb. Your horse on the left is lame, Caleb said. Won't make it back to your camp. Marston's eyebrows rose. You can tell from here, mountain man. I see everything. Marston laughed, genuine this time. I could use someone like you. $2 a day, room and board. I work alone. Shame. You'd do well in civilized employment. Then they were gone, horses moving north back toward the ridge. Caleb and Margaret stood in the entrance for a full minute after the sounds faded. Neither spoke. Both understood what had just happened. They'd been found. Not Emma specifically, but their location was now known. Marston would return, and next time he'd bring more than 2 hired men. Inside, Emma emerged from her hiding place, shaking. I'm sorry, this is my fault. I should go to him. Margaret moved to her side. You're not going anywhere. He'll come back, Emma whispered. He always comes back. Caleb closed the stone slab. Then we make sure we're not here when he does. They spent the rest of that day in tense discussion. Ruth returned at midday, circling wide as planned. When she heard what had happened, her face went grim. He knows we're here, she said. He knows Sister Margaret. That means he'll research, find out about the convent about me. We're not anonymous anymore. How long do we have? Margaret asked. Caleb studied the canyon from the entrance. He'll regroup, send word for more men, maybe bring territorial marshal, make it official. 3 days, maybe 4 if weather slows him. We can't fight a marshal, Ruth said. We don't have to, Caleb replied. We just need to not be here. Where do we go? Emma's voice was small, frightened. Caleb had already been thinking about this. 2 miles north, old coal mine, abandoned 10 years ago after a cave-in. Hidden entrance, defensible dry. I cached supplies there last spring. Can Emma travel? Margaret asked. Ruth checked Emma's forehead, her pulse. Fever's down, infections improving. It'll be hard on her, but she can make it. Then we move at first light, Caleb said. Tonight we pack. What about this place? Margaret looked around the shelter that had protected them for 3 years. We cache what we can't carry. If we survive this, we come back. They worked through the night by dim firelight, sorting supplies into essentials and what they'd leave behind. 5 days of dried meat, pine nuts, 2 loaves of bread Emma had baked 3 days ago. Water bladders, though those would freeze. Medical supplies, Ruth's entire kit. Weapons and ammunition. Blankets, hides for warmth. The wooden cross in Margaret's prayer book. Everything else stayed. Cooking pots, extra hides, trap-making supplies. Too heavy, not critical for short-term survival. Caleb created a false trail, walking south in the moonlight, dropping a torn piece of Emma's old dress at the 1-mile mark. Let Marston's trackers find that, follow it toward settlements, waste time. He returned via the creek bed where water didn't hold tracks, covered his approach with pine branches, dragged behind him a racing prince. At dawn, they left, 4 people moving through snow that reached their knees. Temperature 5 degrees above zero, sky the color of old iron. The journey tested them immediately. Ruth's leg, already weak, gave out half a mile from the shelter. She fell gasping, her damaged thigh locked in spasm. Caleb fashioned a walking stick from a pine branch. Ruth used it as a crutch, gritting her teeth, pushing forward. At the 1-mile mark, Emma began showing symptoms. Confusion, slurred speech. Hypothermia returning despite layers of clothing. Ruth stopped them, made Emma eat pine nuts for the fat content, wrapped her in an extra hide. They rested 10 minutes. No more. Cold didn't allow longer stops. At 1.5 miles, they heard voices from the south. Distant but distinct. Male voices calling to each other. Marston's men had returned faster than Caleb predicted. Into the deadfall, Caleb hissed. They dropped into a tangle of fallen logs, pressed themselves flat. Emma between Margaret and Ruth. Caleb at the edge, rifle ready. The voices grew closer. 2 men, maybe 3. Caleb couldn't see them through the trees, but he heard their movements. Professional, methodical, not giving up easily. 15 minutes they waited, barely breathing. Emma started to shiver. Margaret pressed her body against the girl, sharing warmth, covering her mouth when the shivering threatened to become audible. Finally, the voices faded, moving east away from them. Caleb waited 5 more minutes, then signaled. They rose, continued north. Every step felt exposed now, every sound a potential discovery. The coal mine entrance appeared like salvation. Fallen timber covered most of the opening, making it look like natural deadfall. Caleb had camouflaged it further last spring, knowing he might need emergency shelter someday. Stay low, he said. Tight at first, opens up inside. Margaret crawled through first. Emma followed, helped by Ruth. Then Ruth. Caleb came last, pulling brush across the entrance behind them. Inside, the mine opened to a space 15 feet deep, 10 wide, 6 feet high at the center. Damp, but wind protected. The old cedar support beams installed during the mine's working years still held solid. Previous squatters had left debris, broken crate, rusty saw, empty whiskey bottles, rat-eaten bedroll. Ruth swept the floor with pine branches, creating an insulation layer. Margaret arranged their sleeping area in the driest corner. Caleb tested each support beam, making sure the ceiling wouldn't collapse. Emma, exhausted beyond words, simply sat against the wall and closed her eyes. They couldn't risk fire. Smoke would reveal their location. So they huddled together for warmth as darkness fell, temperature plummeting to zero. Caleb took first watch, positioned at the entrance where he could see out but remain hidden, his rifle across his knees, his breath visible in the dim light filtering through gaps in the deadfall. Margaret took second watch at midnight. She sat beside Caleb during the overlap, her body close enough to share warmth. You didn't have to stay, she said quietly. This isn't your fight. Wasn't yours either until you decided it was. She was quiet for a moment. Why did you really help her? The truth. Caleb thought about his son Samuel screaming for him while the world burned. Thought about arriving too late, finding only ash and small bones. The 2 children you couldn't save from the fire, he said. Do you see their faces every night? I see my son. Hear him calling for me. I was 3 miles away checking trap lines when the militia came. By the time I got back, it was over. You couldn't have known. That's what people say. Doesn't make it true. Margaret's scarred hand touched his arm. Maybe we can't save the ones we lost, but we can save the ones in front of us. That's why I stay. They sat in comfortable silence. After that, 2 people who understood that some guilt never healed, only transformed into different action. When Margaret's watch ended, Caleb remained awake. Sleep felt dangerous now. Too many things could go wrong. Morning brought no comfort. Ruth checked Emma's brand infection with ruthless efficiency. It's worse. I need honey and heat. We have neither. They rationed food strictly. 1/4 normal intake. Water came from snow melted against body heat, a process that took 3 hours per bladder. Caleb scouted at dawn alone and careful. He found tracks. Marston's men had followed the false trails south, were still searching in the wrong direction. But he also found new tracks. A different group. Bounty hunters probably drawn by the $100 reward. Multiple threats now. Marston's organization and independent operators looking for easy money. He returned with the news. We have days, maybe less. Once they realize the South Trail is false, they'll sweep north. What do we need? Margaret asked. Leverage. Something that turns law against Marston instead of us. What kind of leverage? Ruth demanded. Proof of his operation. Witnesses willing to testify. Evidence that his contracts violate territorial labor law. And where do we get that? Emma's voice came from her sleeping area. My brother, Silas. Everyone turned. Emma sat up slowly, fever-bright eyes focusing with effort. Silas Hayes. He's 20 now, or would be if he's alive. Marston took him from Denver orphanage 3 years ago, same time he took me. Where is he? Margaret asked. Emma's voice strengthened slightly. Last I heard, he's at Marston's main ranch. 12 miles east. He works carpentry. Marston values him because he's skilled. Ruth moved to Emma's side. If we could get to your brother, he'd testify. Emma nodded. Silas saw everything. The beatings, the impossible contracts. He's literate, read his own papers. He knows it's slavery dressed as law. Caleb stood. Then we get him out. Are you insane? Ruth stared at him. March into Marston's ranch and extract 1 man. Caleb's voice stayed calm. We have 3 days before Marston returns with a marshal. If we rescue Silas first, we have a witness. We have leverage. It's suicide, Ruth insisted. Maybe. But sitting here waiting to be arrested is also suicide. At least this way we take action. That night, as Emma slept and Ruth checked supplies, Caleb sat at the mine entrance, staring into darkness. Margaret found him there. "There's something you're not telling us," she said. Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "I met Marston before. 5 years ago." Margaret waited. Spring of 1872. I was trapping beaver low on supplies. Marston hired me to track 2 runaway workers from his mining camp. Paid $50 up front. Said they'd stolen equipment. He paused. "I found them in 3 days. 2 teenage boys, maybe 16. They weren't thieves, they were chained. Scars on their backs from whippings." "What did you do?" Margaret asked, though she thought she knew. "I let them go. Told Marston I lost their trail in a river. He knew I was lying. But he paid me anyway, said maybe next time I'd be more motivated." Margaret absorbed this. "So he might recognize you. If he looks close, yes." Caleb's jaw tightened. "But that's not what troubles me. I let those boys go, felt righteous about it. But I didn't report Marston. Didn't tell authorities. I took my moral victory and walked away." He looked at Margaret. "How many others has he enslaved since then? How many suffered because I was too cowardly to follow through?" "You did what you could then," Margaret said firmly. "We're doing more now. Is it enough? It's all we have." Days in the coal mine blurred together, cold hunger, fear, and boredom mixed into something that felt like time suspended. Emma's fever finally broke on the 3rd day. Ruth's medical skills, combined with the girl's natural resilience, pulled her back from the edge. Emma asked about plans. Caleb told her they were working on something. Didn't share details yet. The girl had enough to carry without adding more weight. On the 4th day, Caleb made his reconnaissance. He traveled the 12 miles to Marston's ranch, arriving at midday, observing from a ridge 400 yards away. The ranch was substantial. Main house 2 stories, smoke from multiple chimneys. Bunkhouse for workers. Large barn. Separate kitchen shed. Guards visible, rotating on a schedule. Caleb watched for 6 hours, noting patterns, counting men, identifying weak points. He saw Silas Hayes. The description matched. Tall young man working at a carpenter's bench outside the bunkhouse. Right side constantly toward others, protecting his deaf ear. Skilled hands shaping wood into something beautiful. As dusk fell, Caleb overheard a conversation. Marston speaking with his foreman near the well. "The Hayes boy finished that cabinet. Best work I've seen. Peter's talented. Shame his sister caused problems. You want me to use him as leverage? Threaten him to draw her out?" Marston's voice carried genuine consideration. "No. Silas cooperates, works hard. I won't punish him for her choices. He's worth more as a skilled worker than as bait." Caleb absorbed this. Marston wasn't simply evil. He genuinely valued skill, treated productive workers better than others. It didn't excuse the slavery, but it complicated the picture. Later, alone, Marston spoke to himself. Caleb, hidden near the house, heard the words clearly. "Elizabeth, if you were here, you'd tell me I've lost my way. You always said kindness costs nothing. But out here, kindness gets you robbed." He was talking to his dead wife, seeking approval from a ghost. "I built something," Marston continued. "I provide jobs. Why does that make me the villain?" Caleb felt something unexpected. Pity. This man believed his own justifications. Thought he was building civilization in wilderness. The road to hell, Caleb thought, paved with reasonable-sounding excuses. He returned to the coal mine with maps drawn in his mind. Guard rotations. Building layouts. Weak points. The rescue was possible. Barely. But possible. That evening he presented the plan. Margaret, Ruth, and Emma listened intently. 3-phase operation, Caleb said. Margaret creates diversion at the barn. Smoke bombs, not fire. Chaos, but not destruction. While guards respond, Ruth and I enter the kitchen, should contact Silas through the window. He comes willingly or we abort. "What about me?" Emma asked. "You stay here. Your insurance. If we're captured, you're still hidden." Emma started to protest. Margaret cut her off. "This is the smart play, child. We can't risk you." On the 5th night in the coal mine, Marston's voice echoed through the canyon. Caleb heard it from a quarter-mile away. The man had returned, and he'd brought friends. "Stone, I know you're in there somewhere." Caleb crept to a vantage point, saw Marston on horseback with 4 men now. They'd found the false trail, realized the deception swept back north. "I'm impressed," Marston called. "Clever misdirection." But this is getting expensive. I've lost 4 days of work. Silence from the mine. Caleb watched calculating distances, counting weapons. Here's my final offer, Marston shouted. Drop the charges against you and the nuns. All I want is the girl, and I want you to work for me, Stone. $5 a day. Good money. The offer hung in the cold air. Caleb knew what it meant. Sell Emma for safety, trade one life for three. Inside the mine, Emma heard every word. She looked at Margaret. Take the deal. I'm not worth this. Margaret's hand covered Emma's mouth. Quiet. Outside, Caleb remained hidden, made no response. Marston's voice took on an edge. I'm a reasonable man, but you're testing my patience. I'll give you until morning to think it over. Then I come back with the territorial marshal and proper warrants. He turned his horse, paused. Last thing, Stone. There's others looking for her now. Words spread about the reward. You're not just hiding from me anymore. Every bounty hunter in 3 territories will be searching these mountains. The horses departed. Caleb waited a full hour before returning to the mine. Inside, Emma was crying. Margaret held her. Ruth stood by the entrance, knife drawn, ready for anything. I'll go to him, Emma said through tears. I'll end this. No, Caleb said firmly. I'm not worth dying for. That's not your choice to make. Emma looked up confused. What? Caleb knelt so they were eye level. Marston doesn't decide your worth. You do. You survived 3 years of his abuse. You escaped. You're strong. That's worth more than his blood money. But he'll keep coming. Let him come. Caleb stood, looked at Margaret and Ruth. We're not waiting for marshals. We're not negotiating with slavers. Tomorrow before dawn, we go get Silas. We turn this from running to fighting. Margaret nodded slowly. Finally, oation instead of hiding. Ruth checked her knives. About time. Emma wiped her eyes. Thank you. All of you. That night they prepared. Margaret crafted smoke bombs from dry moss and pitch. Ruth sharpened every blade they owned. Emma, despite her protests, was given the task of staying conscious and quiet. Caleb wrote a letter by dim moonlight. Detailed account of Marston's operation, names, dates, locations, addressed to the territorial governor. He gave it to Emma. If we don't return by nightfall, you give this to Jonas the trapper. He'll deliver it. Understand? Emma nodded, clutching the letter like salvation. Just before midnight, Margaret led them in prayer. All 4 knelt in the damp mine, even Caleb, who hadn't prayed since his family died. Lord, Margaret began, voice steady. We ask not for victory, but for justice. Protect these children. Guide our hands. Give us strength for what comes next. Amen, they said together. Then they slept, brief, fitful rest before the pre-dawn operation. Ruth checked Emma's fever one last time. Normal. The girl would survive whatever happened tomorrow. Caleb lay awake, rifle beside him, thinking about choices. 5 years ago, he'd let 2 boys go free, but hadn't fought the system that enslaved them. Tomorrow he'd fight, maybe die fighting. But at least this time he wouldn't walk away. Margaret also stayed awake, her scarred hand tracing the wooden cross she'd carried from the burning convent. She'd saved 1 child that night, lost 2. Tomorrow maybe she could balance the scales slightly. Ruth inventoried medical supplies, preparing for wounds. She'd been a nurse before taking vows. Tomorrow those skills would matter. And Emma, supposedly sleeping, lay with eyes open, terrified and grateful in equal measure. These 3 strangers had risked everything for her. If Silas was rescued, if they all survived, she'd spend her life trying to deserve such loyalty. At 3 a.m, Caleb rose. Time to move. They gathered weapon supplies, resolve. Margaret secured her quiver. Ruth checked her knife placement. Caleb loaded his rifle pistol as backup. Emma watched them prepare. Come back safe. That's the plan, Caleb said. Then they slipped into the darkness, 3 people moving toward Marston's ranch, in a confrontation that would determine all their futures. Behind them, Emma waited alone in the coal mine, clutching a letter that might be their only salvation if everything went wrong. The night held its breath. Dawn approached. And in 12 miles, Silas Hayes slept, unaware that rescue was coming, that his sister lived, that 3 strangers had decided his freedom was worth dying for. Winter tightened its grip on the canyon. The 4 who'd found each other now scattered, some moving toward danger, one left behind, praying for their return. The choice had been made. No more running, no more hiding. They would fight for family even if that family had formed by accident by winter, by the simple decision to not look away when someone needed help. Caleb led them through darkness toward uncertain battle. Margaret followed with arrows that would fly true. Ruth brought medicine for wounds not yet inflicted, and Emma, alone in the mine, guarded their only leverage with the law. Morning would bring blood or salvation. They didn't know which. They only knew they'd face it together, these broken people, who'd become something stronger than any of them had been alone. Caleb paused, his weathered hand reaching for the coffee cup Emma had refilled without being asked. 45 years of small kindnesses between them, gestures that spoke louder than words. Thomas watched his grandfather's face, saw something harder. There now, Grandpa Caleb, did you save him, Emma's brother? Little Samuel had woken, rubbed his eyes. Did you fight? Caleb looked at Emma. She nodded once, permission to continue. We fought, Caleb said quietly, but not the way you might think. Sometimes the hardest fighting happens when you're trying not to kill. He set down the cup, stared into the fire. February 1878, 3 days after Marston's ultimatum. We moved before dawn, 3 of us heading toward his ranch. Emma stayed behind, the hardest job of all. Waiting. Pre-dawn darkness held a quality of suspension, as if the world hadn't yet decided whether to wake or remain sleeping. Temperature hovered at 4 degrees above zero. Stars burned cold and distant overhead. Caleb moved through snow that had crusted overnight, each step crunching loud enough to make him wince. But sound carried differently at this hour. Distorted. Hard to track direction. Behind him, Margaret matched his pace bow slung across her back, quiver secured. She'd wrapped cloth around the arrows to prevent rattling, small details that meant survival or discovery. Ruth brought up the rear, her damaged leg forcing that rolling gait, but she never complained, never asked them to slow. She carried her medical kit and a rifle. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. They'd left Emma in the coal mine 2 hours before dawn. The girl had clung to Margaret for a long moment, then released her, understanding this was necessary. Bring Silas home, Emma had whispered. That's the plan, Margaret replied. Now they covered ground quickly. 12 miles to Marston's ranch. They needed to arrive with enough darkness remaining for approach and extraction. Timing was everything. Caleb had memorized the ranch layout. Main house northeast. Bunkhouse southwest, where Silas slept with 11 other workers. Guard rotation every 2 hours, 3 men total. Kitchen shed isolated on the western edge, away from other buildings due to fire risk. That kitchen shed was their entry point, close enough to the bunkhouse to signal Silas, far enough from guard posts to avoid immediate detection. The plan was simple because complex plans fell apart under pressure. Margaret would position herself on the eastern ridge with smoke bombs. When Caleb signaled, she'd light them at the barn. Smoke would draw guards away from the bunkhouse. Caleb would enter the kitchen shed, contact Silas through the window facing the workers' quarters. Ruth would hold the western tree line, providing cover fire if needed, but preferably staying hidden. 3 minutes. That's how long Caleb estimated they had from smoke ignition to guard response. 3 minutes to make contact, convince Silas to come and extract. If it took longer, they'd be discovered. If Silas refused, they'd abort. If anything went wrong, Ruth had orders to get Margaret out. Caleb would create a diversion, lead pursuit away. No one had asked what happened if Caleb got captured. They all knew. Mountain men didn't survive captivity. He'd fight until killed or find a way to die on his own terms. They reached the ridge overlooking Marston's ranch as the eastern sky began to pale. Not true dawn yet, but the darkness had thinned to charcoal gray. Caleb studied the compound. Smoke from the main house chimney. Dim light in one guard shack window. The bunkhouse dark and silent. Workers slept until 5 when a bell would wake them for morning labor. They had 20 minutes before that bell, 20 minutes while the ranch still drowsed. Margaret moved to her position, 200 yards east, elevation advantage, for visibility. She arranged 6 smoke bombs, pitch and dry moss wrapped in cloth. Once lit, they'd produce thick white smoke for 5 minutes. Not fire, important distinction. They weren't arsonists. Ruth settled into the tree line, southwest rifle braced against a fallen log. Clear sight lines to the compound. She could reach Caleb in 30 seconds if he needed extraction. Caleb waited, watching guard patterns. The men moved with the casual attention of people doing routine duty in a place where nothing ever happened. That complacency was their weakness. At 4:45, Caleb gave the signal. a brief flash of metal mirror catching starlight. Margaret struck flint to tinder. The first smoke bomb ignited, then the second, third. White smoke billowed toward the barn, thick and spreading. From a distance, it looked like fire. Exactly the illusion they needed. Shouts erupted from the guard shack. Fire! Get water! 3 guards ran toward the barn, grabbing buckets, yelling for help. Workers began emerging from the bunkhouse, confused and half-dressed. Caleb moved, fast but not running. Running drew eyes. He crossed open ground to the kitchen shed, slipped inside through the unlocked door. The interior smelled of old grease and flour. Cast iron pots hung from ceiling hooks. A work table dominated the center. Wooden window shutters faced the bunkhouse. Caleb moved to that window, opened the shutter slightly. 20 yards to the bunkhouse. He could see workers milling outside, watching the smoke, unsure whether to help or stay clear. Then he spotted Silas Hayes. Taller than the others, standing slightly apart, his right side toward the crowd, protecting his deaf ear. His hands moved with unconscious grace, even while standing idle. Carpenter's hands. Caleb tapped on the window frame. Pattern of sounds, tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 pause, tap, tap. Silas turned his head. The pattern meant something to him. He scanned the area looking for the source. Caleb tapped again. Same pattern. Silas's eyes locked on the kitchen shed window. He saw Caleb's face in the dim interior. Froze. Caleb gestured. Come here, now. Silas glanced around, checking if anyone watched. The other workers were focused on the smoke, the guards shouting orders, the general chaos. He took 3 steps toward the kitchen shed, casual, like he was checking something. He reached the window. Who are you? Caleb kept his voice low. Silas Hayes, your sister Emma sent me. The young man's face transformed. Shock, hope, disbelief cascading across his features. Emma, she's alive and safe. But Marston's hunting her. We need you to testify against him. Silas's jaw tightened. If I leave, he'll hunt me too. Then we fight together. Family doesn't abandon family. Silas looked back at the bunkhouse, at the other workers. 3 boys stood near the door. Tommy, 16, with a twisted ankle he'd gotten from a beating last week. Jake, 15, skinny and terrified of everything. Ben, 17, quiet and steady. Caleb saw where Silas was looking. What is it? There are 3 boys here, Silas said quietly. Younger than me. Marston beats them for minor mistakes. Tommy can barely walk. Jake has nightmares. Ben's the only thing holding them together. Caleb processed this. The plan accounted for 1 extraction. 4 was exponentially more difficult. But he thought about 18 years ago, about walking away from injustice, about 2 boys he'd freed but never followed up on, never knowing if they survived. Not this time. Can they move fast? Caleb asked. If they know it's freedom or death, yes, then tell them. 60 seconds. Anyone ready comes now. I'm responsible for all of you. Silas studied him. You're sure I'm sure. Silas turned, walked back to the bunkhouse with forced casualness. Caleb watched him approach the 3 boys, speak briefly. Tommy's face lit with desperate hope. Jake looked terrified. Ben nodded once, calm acceptance. 40 seconds elapsed. The guards were discovering the smoke came from controlled burns, not actual fire. Confusion would turn to anger soon. Questions would be asked. Silas and the 3 boys started walking toward the kitchen shed. Not running. Walking like they had a reason to be there. Then someone shouted. Hey, where are you going? Silas broke into a run. The boys followed. The compound erupted. Guards turned from the barn, saw workers fleeing. Rifles came up. Caleb stepped into the kitchen, shed doorway, fired his rifle into the air. The shot echoed like thunder. Guards dove for cover, unsure where the threat was. Silas reached the shed first, the boys right behind. Caleb grabbed the youngest, Jake, bodily hauled him inside. Tommy limped in, gasping. Ben pushed Silas through the door, followed himself. Margaret's arrows flew from the ridge. 2 shots, both hitting dirt near guards' feet. Warning, not killing. Message clear. We can kill you if we choose. We're choosing mercy. Ruth fired from the tree line. Her shot splintered wood above a guard's head. Another warning. Run. Caleb commanded. All of you, north toward the trees. Woman with rifle will cover you. What about you? Silas demanded. I'm slowing pursuit. Go. He shoved them out the back entrance, watched them sprint toward the tree line. Margaret fired 2 more arrows, keeping guards pinned. Ruth had stepped into the open now, rifle aimed, her voice carrying across the compound. "Stay down or the next shot drops you." The guards hesitated. They weren't soldiers. They were hired muscle paid to watch workers who'd already been broken. Facing armed resistance wasn't in their contract. Caleb backed out of the kitchen shed, covering his own retreat. He fired once more, high, another reminder that he could kill, but was choosing not to. Then he ran. Not toward the tree line where the others had gone, but east, drawing attention, making himself the visible target. It worked. Guards focused on him, started pursuit. Marston himself emerged from the main house, saw the chaos, mounted his horse. Caleb ran through snow over rocks using terrain he'd scouted days before. He led them a quarter-mile east, then doubled back north through the creek bed, covering his tracks. By the time pursuit reached the creek, Caleb was gone, vanished like smoke. Mountain man trick learned young, perfected through necessity. He circled wide, rejoined the others at the rally point 2 miles north of the ranch. All 5 were there. Silas, Tommy with his bad ankle, Jake hyperventilating, Ben calm and watchful, Ruth and Margaret standing guard. "Keep moving," Caleb said. "They'll regroup and track us." Tommy fell after another mile. His ankle gave out completely. He went down hard, crying out. Ruth knelt beside him. "It's broken. Has been for a while. He needs it set properly." "We don't have time," Margaret said, scanning their back trail. Caleb made a decision. "I'll carry him." "You're not healed yourself," Ruth protested. "Doesn't matter. He's coming with us." Caleb lifted Tommy in a fireman's, carried the boy's weight pressing on his injured shoulder. Pain flared white hot. He ignored it. Pain was temporary. Leaving the boy was permanent. They moved slower now, but they moved. 6 people instead of 4. The group that had formed in winter had grown, absorbing more broken pieces. By midday, they heard hoofbeats behind them. Pursuit had found their trail. Caleb stopped the group at a narrow defile between 2 rock faces. Defensible position, limited approach. "Margaret, Ruth, take them to the coal mine," Caleb said. "I'll slow pursuit here." Ruth grabbed his arm. "That's suicide. It's buying time. If I don't make it, you know what to do. Get them to Emma. Give the letter to Jonas. Testify at whatever trial comes." Margaret's scarred hand touched his shoulder. "Don't die, mountain man. Wasn't planning on it." They left him there. Caleb found cover behind a boulder, rifle, loaded pistol, backup knife ready. He watched the approach trail, waiting. Marston arrived with 2 armed men. They dismounted 100 yards out, smart enough not to ride into an ambush. Stone Marston's voice carried clearly. "Let's talk." Caleb remained silent. "Let Marston make the next move." "I respect what you did," Marston called. "Taking Silas. Clever. But you've stolen from me 5 workers. That's $500 in property value." Still silence. "I can't let that stand. You understand business. This isn't personal. This is economics." Caleb finally responded, voice echoing between rock walls. "Business based on slavery, indentured servitude, legal under territorial law. Legal doesn't mean right." Marston's voice took on a different quality, more personal. "You let 2 boys go 5 years ago. I remember. I respected that. Thought maybe you had principles." The words hit harder than Caleb expected. "But then you disappeared." Marston continued. "Didn't report me, didn't testify, didn't do anything meaningful. You were a moral coward, Stone. Same as everyone." Caleb felt the truth of it. "Not anymore," he called back. One of Marston's men tried to flank right, moving through brush. Caleb saw the movement, fired. The shot hit the man's shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped screaming. The second guard fired back, missed. Caleb relocated, fired again. Hit the guard's leg, not fatal, but disabling. Both guards down, wounded but alive. Caleb could have killed them, chose not to. Marston remained behind cover, now alone. "You're a better shot than I expected." "I don't want to kill you, Marston." "Then what do you want?" "I want you to let them go. All of them." Marston laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Not possible. I have legal claim." "Then I'll break your legal claim." Caleb drew the letter from his coat, the one he'd written days ago. Detailed account of Marston's operation. "I sent a letter to the territorial governor 2 weeks ago, via Jonas the Trapper. Detailed everything. Your trafficking operation. Brands, abuse, impossible contracts, You're bluffing. Test me. Tommy, Jake, Ben. They'll all testify. So will Silas. So will Emma. Distant sound of horses, multiple riders. Marston heard it too. That's my marshal. Or mine, Caleb replied. U.S. Marshal Webb arrived with 3 deputies, professional lawmen, not hired guns. Webb was a lean man in his 50s, weathered face eyes that missed nothing. Lower your weapons, Webb commanded. Both of you, Marston stepped into view, papers in hand. Marshal Webb, thank God. This man attacked my property, stole 5 workers. I have warrants filed in Salt Lake City. Webb examined the papers. Caleb remained in cover but called out. Marshal Dalton Marston runs a trafficking operation. I have 5 witnesses who can testify to slavery, beatings, contracts that violate territorial labor law. Webb's expression remained neutral. Both of you have made serious accusations. This requires investigation. Then Silas Hayes stepped into view, emerging from where he'd been hidden nearby. He hadn't gone to the coal mine with the others, had stayed close, ready to support Caleb if needed. Marshal Webb, Silas said clearly, my name is Silas Hayes. I've been held by Dalton Marston under false contract for 3 years. He produced a folded paper from his pocket. This is my contract. I'm literate. I've read it. It binds me until age 25 unless I pay $500 debt. But Marston doesn't pay wages, only provides food and shelter. I can never earn the money to buy my freedom. That's slavery. Webb took the contract, examined it carefully. Where did you get this? I stole it from Marston's office 2 years ago. Made a copy, hid it in my carpentry tools. Webb read the document, his face hardening. This contract violates territorial labor law. Debt exceeds reasonable terms. He looked at Marston. I'm suspending these contracts pending review. Your workers are released to their own recognizance. Marston's face flushed red. You can't do that. I can and will. Webb's voice carried absolute authority. If they choose to testify against you, that's their right. Marston's empire crumbled in that moment. Years of careful construction, of legal maneuvering, of building power through exploitation collapsed under the weight of 1 honest lawman and 5 witnesses willing to speak truth. This isn't over, Marston said to Caleb. I have money, lawyers, friends in government, and I have truth. Caleb stepped from cover, rifle lowered. Eventually, truth wins. Idealist, Marston spat. You'll die poor. Maybe, but I'll die free. Marshal Webb arrested Marston on the spot, bound his hands, read charges that would expand as more evidence emerged. The wounded guards were treated, then also arrested as accessories. The journey back to the coal mine took 3 hours. Webb and his deputies accompanied them, ensuring safety. When they arrived, Emma stood at the entrance, barely breathing, waiting. She saw Silas before he saw her. Her brother alive, walking whole. Silas, she whispered. Then louder. Silas. He turned, saw her, his face transforming. Emma. They ran to each other, met in an embrace that held 3 years of separation. Grief, hope, an impossible reunion. Tommy, Jake, and Ben watched with something like envy. They had no siblings waiting. But Ruth stepped forward, spoke to them with nurse's authority softened by genuine care. You 3 are staying with us, if you want. Tommy, injured and exhausted, nodded immediately. Jake looked uncertain but hopeful. Ben's quiet voice carried conviction. Where else would we go? Marshal Webb observed all this, made notes in a leather journal. He pulled Caleb aside. I'll be filing formal charges in Salt Lake City, Territory Court. 3 weeks from now, all of you will need to testify. We'll be there, Caleb said. Webb studied him. You did good work here, Stone. Risky but good. I'll make sure that's noted in my report. Just following through, Caleb replied. Should have done it years ago. Better late than never. The trial in Salt Lake City 3 weeks later filled the courthouse to capacity. Territorial Judge Blackwell presided, a stern man in his 60s who'd built his reputation on fairness. Emma testified first. She described her purchase from the orphanage, the false promises, the 18-hour days, the attempted assault that led to her branding, the abandonment in the snow. She spoke calmly, clearly, without crying. Strength earned through survival. Judge Blackwell listened intently, took notes. Marston's lawyer tried to discredit her, tried to paint her as a troublemaker, a thief, an unreliable witness. Emma looked the lawyer in the eye. You weren't there. You didn't live it. I have the brand to prove every word I've said. She pulled down her sleeve, showed the infected M still healing on her shoulder. The courtroom went silent. Silas testified next. He presented his contract, explained the mathematics that made freedom impossible, showed how wages weren't paid, how debt accumulated through forced purchases of basic supplies at inflated prices. The judge examined the contract, compared it to territorial labor statutes, found multiple violations. Tommy, Jake, and Ben each testified. Corroborated stories of beatings, impossible work hours, children as young as 14 forced into dangerous labor. 8 other workers came forward, found by Marshall Webb during his investigation. All told similar stories. Marston's defense crumbled. His lawyer argued technicalities, claimed Marston believed the contracts were legal, painted him as a businessman misunderstood rather than a criminal. But the evidence was overwhelming. The testimonies too consistent. The contracts too obviously designed to create permanent servitude. Judge Blackwell delivered his verdict 3 days later. Mr. Marston, you've built your fortune on the suffering of children. This court finds you guilty of human trafficking, false imprisonment, assault, in violation of territorial labor laws. He paused, looked directly at Marston. Sentence is 20 years in territorial prison. Additionally, you will pay $10,000 restitution to your victims, divided equally among those who've testified. Marston showed no emotion. As guards led him away, he looked at Caleb one final time. You were right, he said quietly. Truth won. For now is enough, Caleb replied. Outside the courthouse, the freed workers gathered in uncertain clusters. Some had family to return to. Others had nothing. Silas Hayes was offered a position in Salt Lake City. A carpenter's shop wanted his skills. $2 per day, room and board, legitimate employment. He stood with Emma in the courthouse square, sunshine warming stone buildings, and faced a choice. I could stay here, he said, learn advanced skills, have a normal life. Emma touched his arm. I'd understand. You've earned it, but that would mean leaving you again. Not leaving, just going where you need to go. Silas looked at the city around them. Civilization, order, predictability, everything he'd been denied for 3 years. Then he thought about the coal mine, the mountains, the group of broken people who'd risked everything to save him. I'll visit, he decided, monthly. But I need to try this, see if I can build something. Emma hugged him. That's not leaving. That's living. Tommy chose the orphanage in Salt Lake. Better conditions, legitimate schooling. He wanted to be a teacher someday, help other children avoid his fate. Ben decided to stay with Silas, learn carpentry, build skills that would serve him for life. Jake looked at Margaret and Ruth with desperate eyes. Can I come back with you? Cities scare me. Too loud. Too many people. Ruth's hands settled on his shoulder. Of course, we can always use another set of hands. So the group that returned to the mountains numbered 5. Caleb, Margaret, Ruth, Emma, and Jake. They traveled north as spring began to soften winter's grip. The coal mine remained their temporary home for another week while they assessed their options. The hidden shelter, their original home for 3 years, still stood, but it felt too small now, too confining. Caleb proposed building something permanent, a proper cabin on higher ground defensible with room to grow. They chose a ridge above the coal mine. Morning sun, good water access, clear sight lines protected by surrounding cliffs. Construction took 6 weeks. Caleb taught Jake carpentry basics. Margaret and Ruth gathered stones for the foundation. Emma, fully healed now, directed kitchen planning with the confidence of someone who understood what a real home should be. The cabin measured 20 feet by 15, large enough for privacy, small enough to heat efficiently. 2 rooms, one for living and gathering, one sleeping alcove. Stone chimney that drew smoke cleanly. 2 windows for light without exposure. They worked from dawn to dusk, stopping only for meals. The physical labor felt like meditation, each log placed, each stone set, building something that mattered. By late April, the cabin stood complete. Not beautiful, but solid. Built to last, Jonas the Trapper visited, brought supplies and news from settlements. Word had spread about the trial, about Marston's conviction, about the mountain grew up that had fought slavery. Others began arriving, a widow whose husband died in mining accident, a teenage boy running from an abusive father, an older man whose farm had failed, nowhere else to go. Margaret and Ruth welcomed them. Established rules assigned work, created structure. The cabin expanded, became 2 cabins, then 3. By summer's end, Stone Creek had a population of 15. By the following spring, 23. They built a small chapel, Margaret's design, where she led services that mixed Catholic tradition with frontier practicality. Ruth established a medical post, treated injuries and illnesses for anyone in the surrounding territories. Emma married a young surveyor named Daniel Webb, Marshall Webb's nephew, in the spring of 1879. Daniel had met her during the trial, saw strength where others saw damage. They built their own cabin near the original, raised 3 children. Emma's first son, born in 1880, was named Samuel. After Caleb's lost boy, Silas visited monthly as promised. Sometimes brought Ben. They'd work on carpentry projects, help expand the community, then return to Salt Lake City and their own lives. The community became known as Stone Creek, a place where broken people found shelter, where questions about past weren't required, where work and contribution mattered more than history. Caleb carved marks on the main beam each year, tally of people who'd found home there. By 1885, the beam held 47 marks. Margaret and Ruth aged together, 2 women who had lost their church but found their calling. Ruth died in 1910, heart failure, peaceful in sleep. She was 65. Margaret lived until 1918. She helped deliver Emma's grandchildren, including a baby named Thomas, in 1910. She died during the influenza epidemic at age 77, tending others until her final breath. Emma and Caleb remained the last of the original 4. They aged into the roles of patriarch and matriarch, respected by a community of over 40 souls who called Stone Creek home. The fire in the community hall had burned to embers. Outside, full darkness had fallen. Spring wind moved through budding cottonwoods. Thomas looked at the photograph again, then at his grandmother, Emma. "You were so young." Emma smiled, touched the faded brand scar on her shoulder, still visible after 45 years. "I was 17 and certain I'd die alone." Then 3 strangers decided differently. "And you all just stayed?" Thomas asked. "Built all this?" Caleb's voice came quiet but firm. "We didn't just stay, boy. We built something. A place where broken people could heal. Over the years, we took in 53 people who needed shelter. Some stayed, some moved on. All found safety when they needed it most." Little Samuel, drowsy again, mumbled a question. "Are you happy, Great-Grandpa Caleb?" Caleb looked at Emma, at the community they'd built, at the children who represented futures they'd protected. Happy is the wrong word. Satisfied. "We did something that mattered." Thomas traced the faces in the photograph. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because you needed to be old enough to understand what family costs," Emma added. "And because some memories need time to become stories instead of nightmares." The community members began to leave, heading to their own cabins. Tomorrow would bring work as always. Fields to plant, repairs to make, children to teach. But tonight had been for remembering, for honoring the 4 who started it all, for teaching the next generation that family wasn't blood, but choice and work and staying when things got hard. Caleb handed the photograph to Thomas. "Keep this. Show your children someday. Tell them about the winter 1877 when 4 strangers became family. Tell them we weren't bound by law or blood or vows. We were bound by winter, by suffering, by choosing each other. And that's stronger than anything." Emma finished. Little Samuel had fallen asleep. Thomas held the photograph carefully, understanding its weight. "I'll remember, Grandpa Caleb, I promise. Good boy." They sat in comfortable silence as the fire died. Outside, Stone Creek settled into night. 40 cabins now housing families, individuals, children who laughed without fear. A chapel on the hill. A cemetery with 3 graves together. The graves would soon hold 4. Emma would die that autumn of 1922, quietly in her sleep, Daniel beside her. Caleb would follow in 1924, age 87, surrounded by faces he'd helped save. They'd be buried together on the hill, the 4 who winter found. Margaret Wright, 1839 to 1918. Ruth Porter, 1845 to 1910. Emmeline Hayes Webb, 1860 to 1922. Caleb Stone, 1837 to 1924. 4 people who'd each carried grief so heavy it should have killed them. 4 who'd found each other by accident, by necessity, by the simple decision to not look away when someone needed help. They'd built more than a community. They'd built proof that broken things, when joined carefully, become stronger than they ever were whole. Thomas left that night carrying the photograph in a story that would shape his understanding of what family meant. He'd tell it to his children. They'd tell theirs. The story would live longer than any of the original four, echoing through generations. In 1950, 73 years after that first winter, Stone Creek would house over 120 people. The original cabin, reinforced and expanded, would serve as community center. The beam Caleb carved would still stand, Mark's visible testimony to survival and choice. But that night in 1922, the story was still being lived. Emma and Caleb sat together as the last embers died, two old survivors who'd seen the worst of humanity and chosen to build the best they could. Neither spoke. They'd said everything that mattered over 45 years of shared meals, shared work, shared losses and victories. Outside, stars wheeled overhead. Wind carried the scent of pine and snowmelt and new growth. Spring promised another summer, another harvest, another generation of children who'd grow up in safety their parents never knew. The four who winter found had kept their promise. They hadn't just survived. They'd built something that would outlast them. Something that mattered. Family not by birth, but by choice. By staying when it was hard. By fighting for each other when fighting seemed impossible. By deciding in a frozen canyon in Utah Territory in 1877 that one person's suffering was everyone's responsibility. They'd been four broken strangers that winter. They'd become something eternal. And their story, told by firelight to children who needed to understand what real strength looked like, would live on long after the last ember died.